The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, I'm Matthew Tucker, Reader in Workplace and Facilities Management at Liverpool Business School at Liverpool John Moores University. I'm really delighted you could join us during this lunchtime hour in the UK, and well, if you're anything like me, I'd normally be devouring my lunch definitely a minute past the clock hits 12. And really that's all I've been thinking about during this lockdown period, to be honest. But yeah, in all seriousness, I'm really pleased you could join us today, and I hope that we can share some really good stuff with you over the next 60 minutes. So I'll be your host today, and I'd like to welcome you to the third webinar in IWFM's Navigating Turbulent Times series, where we're going to be exploring the impact of coronavirus and global megatrends on workplace and facilities management. We've called this episode Tales from the Frontline, and today we're going to hear directly from workplace and facilities professionals managing their way through this set of extraordinary circumstances. I'm joined today by three outstanding guests. We each operate in different parts of the sector, and I want to explore with them some of the issues they've encountered in recent weeks as we navigate our way through this crisis. Hopefully we'll be able to draw out some of the wider themes and implications for the sector as we look to the future and the next phase of response to this pandemic, which is certainly a pertinent thing that is floating around the industry at the moment. So let me introduce my guests. Kenneth Birrell. Kenneth is FM Portfolio Director for Facilities Management Advisory Services at Mott MacDonald. Kenneth has over 30 years experience of both operational and strategic level FM, primarily within the NHS. Most recently, Kenneth has been supporting the development of the COVID field hospitals across the UK and was working with the Scottish Government and Health Facilities Scotland on the mobilisation of the 1,000-bed Louisa Jordan Hospital at Glasgow's SEC. So I'm really pleased to have Kenneth on the panel today, and I'm sure he'll be able to give a valuable input. Next on our panel is Laura Birnbaum. So Laura specialises in leading and developing the real estate function within corporate organisations to deliver property strategies in accordance with wider business plans. Laura's head of property at the London Fire Brigade, and this includes both the strategic development of real estate scenarios, the execution of approved projects and transactions, and the delivery of FM. I'm also delighted to have Laura on, as Laura is actually the IWFM Manager of the Year in 2018, so welcome, Laura. And finally, we have Andy Candelent. Andy has over 20 years experience and is currently head of FM for Leadec, who are a specialist provider of FM and other support services in the manufacturing and industrial sector. Alongside this role, Andy is an active member for IWFM, supporting the Institute as the founder and chair of the Manufacturing Working Group. He's also a committee member for both the International SIG and the Midlands region, as well as being lead judge for the Product of the Year category in the IWFM Impact Awards 2020. Andy also shares his facilities management knowledge and experience with the manufacturing industries community as a member of Make UK's Regional Advisory Board for the Midlands and East of England. Okay, guys, so that's the panel. Now what we're going to do is we're each going to on some of our experiences so far on the front line. So I'll say a few words firstly about the things that I've seen and heard at Liverpool John Moores University and how an academic institution is responding to the pandemic. I'm then going to hand over to each of my guests, who will take 5 minutes to give us an overview of their frontline experiences over the last 6 weeks or so. Certainly at a time when we've all witnessed such extraordinary change. So I'll kick off with this. Frontline priority at the university is certainly to our 25,000 odd students that we have across the UK and the rest of the world. I'd say our goal really has been to ensure that there's no detriment to them as a result of COVID-19, and there's been a raft of policies and guidance that's been issued to support them and staff, and there's been some tireless efforts behind the scenes from our central services teams to make this happen. we've really had a continuous kind of delivery with this, and we've had to immediately mobilize all teaching to online methods. And it was really crucial that we ensure that there was no gap in delivery to our students. It's taken a considerable effort, but the university really has done an excellent job in supporting us in this, and I'll allude to that a little bit later. From a personal experience, I've spent a lot of hours with learning material. Any area of the house that I can find is quiet. I have 3 young kids at home. One is 18 months old, and yeah, that's been a challenge in making sure we can have the right technology that's you're able to deliver at a time which is convenient for us, but really gives our students accessible and appropriate information. So I've produced a lot of asynchronous material that students can access at their own convenience through our virtual environment. Plus, I've delivered a lot of live sessions using whatever platform, and I think this is an important thing to pick up maybe later on, whatever platform is convenient or suitable for a particular student group, whether it be Zoom, Teams, Skype, etc. And I just wanted to touch on this a little bit more, and I'm not sure if this is something that would be an immediate consideration when thinking about conducting live sessions to students or your colleagues, but there's also a lot of cultural sensitivity that goes with this. I'll give you an example. Many of my students are based in the Middle East, in particular in the UAE. They're obviously observing Ramadan at the moment, and that actually has a big influence on the time of day in which they can talk to me and I can talk to them. And it also influences the online platforms that we use to communicate with them. For example, they're not permitted to use Skype or WhatsApp video calls. So really trying to change our working patterns and the convenience for everybody has been a crucial part of this. I'm actually mainly responsible for doctoral research students. So most of those are internationally based. And one of my immediate situations during this lockdown period has been to ensure that if students are out in the field collecting data, that they're safe and they're able to hopefully continue with their research as safely as possible. For some, that's meant halting data collection altogether, but we spent a lot of time trying to find ways that students can adapt their research to incorporate online research methods. So I spent a lot of time disseminating information and guidance on online research methods to them and liaising with our university research ethics committee on the appropriate protocol to give them. And first and foremost, just ensuring regular, daily or weekly communication with them. So I'd like to just conclude my small segment before I hand over to the guests by just giving you a flavour for the wider social obligation as a university that we have, to hopefully provide our expertise to the region and nationally and internationally during this time. So I'll finish with some of the amazing things really that the university is doing. Our nursing and our allied health students and members of staff are helping often on the front line in hospitals and health centres. So we're having to make sure that they have the right support and the right facilities available to them, whether that be having on-campus support or at home. We've got engineering and technology staff that are currently, they'll probably be doing it as speaking, 3D printing life-saving face shields for the NHS. So we've had to make sure that their print farm is maintained and is able to be operated during this time. And they're producing that on a daily basis. We've actually got student teachers as part of our School of Education, and they're supporting local schools in a variety of ways. Some of them are on school rotas, so they're helping ensure that schools can remain open during this time. And others are helping in providing online teaching opportunities and marking as well for school teachers. And finally, we've got fashion staff and students, and they're coordinating efforts in the city to make scrubs for doctors and nurses in the NHS, which is a great thing. So I just wanted to finish on that to give you a wider feel for what we're doing as a university. And really, so far, the outcomes of all these measures have been successful, and we're continuing to learn and get better at what we're doing. And I'll finish on this point that I think we're quite fortunate at the university to have a strong leadership that supported us through this in terms of the unique situations for us as staff and for our students during this time. And there's definitely been that sensitivity to act, and I'll allude to that maybe in the panel discussion later on. So I'm going to hand over to my guests now to give a 5-minute overview of some of their thoughts. And you first, and to give your short overview of your frontline experiences over the past 6 weeks or so.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Like the thousands of Mott MacDonald staff in the UK, I was working from home, utilising Skype and Teams calls for meetings and calls. When I got a call from one of my colleagues asking if we could meet with the Army at the Scottish Event Campus in Glasgow. Within half an hour, I was on my way into Glasgow. We met with a small military team and NHS Scotland. The Army had undertaken a high-level scoping of the campus and anticipated it could facilitate around 1,000 beds if it was going to be turned into a field hospital. We were then quickly joined by 4 main contractors on the Health Facility Scotland framework, architects, project managers and NHS specialists over that weekend. When we received the go-ahead, the project ramped up rapidly, and at peak there were around 1,000 people on site, of which 800 of those were construction contractors. Mott MacDonald were providing project management, operations, logistics planning, design of the external areas, and I was supporting with the Facilities Management Advisory Service. Our target completion date was based on Scottish Government modelling. This drove the project and project decisions. The facility was going to be a hospital, and therefore the design, construction, operation needed to comply with NHS building standards and guidance. Because time was tight, where standards couldn't be met due to either the existing building or time constraints, we had to look at a risk-based approach. FM workstream had to keep up with the rapid design process to ensure FM services could support the clinical model. Multidisciplinary discussions turned into sketches, then into architectural plans, and then passed on to contractors to source supplies and start construction, all happening within a matter of hours. Multiple workstream meetings occurred each day, with daily construction and programme meetings happening twice a day. And not only had we to plan the FM services for the operational hospital, we also had to mobilise the FM service on a site which had been mothballed to now cope with the hundreds of people on site, including enhanced security, access control, maintenance and cleaning regimes, etc. The SEC staff and existing FM contractors were fantastic and extremely supportive, allowing us to quickly re-establish the FM service, which had been on a basic care and maintain service to scale up for the mobilisation of the project. Staff were really enthusiastic and helpful, embracing new working arrangements that had to be rapidly developed and implemented to meet the social distancing requirements, which was under constant review. The Hydra Arena was utilised for staff welfare, food services were provided 24 hours a day, and no other facilities were available locally. The floor of the arena, which normally accommodates a stage and 1,000 people for concerts, was used for storing NHS equipment and supplies. All this had to be done while maintaining social distancing, creating one-way walkways throughout the site, seating within meeting rooms and eating areas, marking on floors to make traffic flows, queuing distance, etc. So large rooms become quite small when you need to put people 2 metres apart. Suppliers were fantastic, pulling out all the stops to get materials on site. We received donations from a number of suppliers, and we had one supplier restarting manufacturing, bringing furloughed staff back to manufacture hand sanitizer brackets for bed spaces, as nothing was available within the UK. NHS procurement teams worked tirelessly, sourcing supplies and equipment in a diminishing and competitive marketplace, where other field hospitals were also competing for the same goods. During the operational period, there was going to be 3 main FM contractors providing the services: G4S, Serco and FES FM. Due to the pace of the project, the FM service solution had to evolve to meet both the clinical design requirements, and this shaped the staff model and staffing requirements. Soft FM services managed by Serco will be provided by a mix of SEC subcontractors and new staff directly employed and trained by Serco. Around FM services such as cleaning, portering, catering, logistics, HR, to create the mobilisation and management team for the service. Engagement with the team was key, as we had to problem solve, develop and solutions to reflect the environment and the really tight deadline. The SEC wasn't designed as a hospital, it had to have many adaptations to meet the NHS building and requirements, such as installation of medical gases and suction increases to the ventilation system. FES FM and existing FM undertake system facility. G4S were the SEC security provider, so they knew the site well and were able to rapidly deploy staff and implement the access control system. I need to say that on this job I worked the longest days, worked with the most incredible people I've ever worked with, seen a can-do attitude I've never seen before, and this really needs to be my sort of most rewarding experience. And I really can't convey and give credit in a few minutes to the amount of effort, enthusiasm and determination given by everyone to turn what was large exhibition space into a 1,000-bed plus hospital within 18 days. Okay, Mark.
Thanks so appreciate that, and you know, I think that's a really unique hands-on experience that you've been able to share with us, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of that in the panel discussion in a minute. So I'll now pass over to Laura. If you could give us a short overview, Laura, of your frontline experiences over the past 6 weeks or so.
Sure. Hi everyone, Laura here. I hope everyone's well and loved ones are well as well. My experience is slightly different because rather than having a direct requirement to deliver a specific ask related to COVID, I'm providing a slightly more traditional facilities and property role, being behind the scenes in a frontline organisation. So I'm the head of property at London Fire Brigade. LFB has really stepped up during COVID, collaborating, for example, with the London Ambulance Service, so that you now have firefighters driving ambulances. LFB have also, we've helped them repurpose some warehousing to help with the coordination of PPE around London. And so that intensification of use and that divergence from what the brigade normally do, combined with some of the pressures you would expect from COVID, have made these a really interesting 6 weeks to work in a frontline organisation. So one of the things I would like to touch on is something quite small and simple that's had big ramifications. So when we have a firefighter report with COVID symptoms within a relatively short amount of time from leaving a station, property have quite quickly had to learn how to undertake the deep clean, and we were worried that the deep clean would take our station off the run for quite some time, particularly as the stations are residential, they have curtains and soft furnishings. And with a huge amount of thanks to our supply chain and a lot of detailed scenario planning, we've put in place a lot of new processes and ways of working. So we're turning around those deep cleans in about half the expected time, which is really minimising the time the station's off the run. This all requires a lot of union engagement. It requires an enormous amount of motivation of staff and supply chain. We have quite low-paid staff providing this essential work through our supply chain using public transport, etc. So thinking of every single step of what was previously quite a low excitement item, such as cleaning, has been really interesting. But I'd say the lesson I've really learned from that part of the frontline experience is really, this has been a great opportunity to raise the profile of my team. So the firefighters are rightly considered heroic in their efforts, and they really do save lives. But this has been a time for the whole brigade really to reflect on the importance of what had previously seemed quite mundane in terms of cleaning and essential maintenance, and the wider infrastructure, the PPE that both the supply chain needs and procurement needs, etc., that go into really helping that frontline service run on a day-to-day basis, let alone in these more unusual times. We try to capitalise on that as much as possible, reminding everyone and refreshing our thank you scheme with our supply chain and our compliments processes internally. And we are really seeing the profile of facilities management move significantly further up the value chain in this frontline service at the moment. It's also been a really interesting opportunity for us in estates to collaborate across the Blue Light Group in London. So we've created much stronger relationships with the Met Police, with the TfL, with London Ambulance Service, all really now looking towards the future, sharing our return to work plans, looking at how we can make the most of warehousing, parking and other property opportunities that are needed to help all of our organisations benefit from any shared experience at the moment. And one of the other initiatives we've worked on as well in this time, which is not dissimilar, is that we are unable to get into the estate to deal with what could become quite a critical backlog of less essential maintenance. So we've launched a virtual inspection programme. One of the benefits of this is even reception staff who don't need to be in the building can undertake this. You don't have to have any training at all. And again, these kinds of initiatives, we're seeing them being shared and being commented in and developed across the Fire Brigade, the Met and others. So it's been a really exciting opportunity, not just to deliver critical frontline services, but also to promote those services and share and learn from other organisations, because we really have common ground at the moment in the way that we didn't have before.
Thanks so much, Laura, and some really fascinating insights there that we're definitely going to be coming back to shortly. Appreciate that. So finally, I'm going to pass to Andy to give us your short overview of your frontline experiences over the past 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's well. Leadec supports customers worldwide in the manufacturing, logistics and transport industries. So as the crisis emerged in the UK, Leadec worked collaboratively with our customers to manage and mitigate the impacts of COVID-19, such as self-isolation, shielding of employees and their families, and the introduction of additional safeguards in the workplace, alongside safeguarding our own premises and our own staff whilst doing so. Following the announcement of the furlough scheme on the 20th of March, some customers opted to cease manufacturing operations fairly abruptly, while others took a scaled back approach to reducing production in a more gradual way. In the UK, transport operators have continued operations, so our cleaners and other support services operatives were designated as essential workers. So we've been supporting our team with the challenge of travelling to work safely, working safely despite the additional risks of the virus, and the use of a new PPE regime. While UK manufacturing has continued, has scaled down significantly or entirely stopped production to reduce the risk to their workforce and contractors. So aligned with this manufacturing shutdown, we have had to significantly reduce FM activities at many sites, and a large proportion of our head office, our site management team and our operations teams have been placed on furlough leave, along with many of our customers' employees. The rest of our business has had to get used to working from home or to working under stringent safety arrangements in the workplace. And then over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and increasingly so as the prospects of a relaxation of lockdown arrangements is discussed, we've been working with customers on mapping their proposed restart programme and ensuring that our support services are restored in alignment with that. To ensure, for instance, that pre-start maintenance activities take place, pre-restart cleaning activities are undertaken to return the plant to a safe and usable condition, introducing measures to social distancing and identifying and implementing new ways of working with our customers, whether it's for FM operations or to facilitate their own manufacturing operations. And then finally, we are looking at how we ramp up our FM support activities as client productivity levels increase and their businesses return to normal. Alongside
okay,
that,
brilliant. Oh, sorry,
go.
I didn't know if you were finished. Go on, Andy. Carry on.
No, that's everything. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Well, we're going to be revisiting a lot of the things that you guys have just alluded to, which is fantastic. I'm going to move into the panel discussion now. So, thinking about these experiences that you've just mentioned, definitely unique, and I'm delighted that we've got such a diverse group on the panel today. First question I'd like to pose to the panel is, where do you think the profession has really stepped up? Have you seen innovation, for example, or novelty, or so perhaps I'll come to you first, Kenneth, with this one.
I think, to be honest, I mean, particularly working on the Lisa Jordan hospital, we saw all of that because we had to be innovative, novel and creative to actually develop something in such a tight timescale. And whether that there was a willingness from everyone, you know, to support the NHS, and that was why it worked so well. I'm not sure, but certainly one of the things that we found that worked really well across all of the work groups was we had an ROC, or rehearsal of concept, where we had actually developed a scale model of the facility drawn on the floor of the hydro with props to show different areas within the building and site elements. And what we did is we walked through with multidisciplinary teams each of the different activities that would happen within the facility, such as, you know, patients arriving, you know, moving materials around, so we can actually walk that through in the comfort of an environment, and actually to see if everything that we were putting forward was actually going to work. You know, if there was any challenges or issues that we'd identified, we could actually iron them out at that stage. So when we came into operation, we knew how things were going to work, and we knew how everything was going to interface with each other. Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Kenneth. Laura, I just wanted to come to you quickly, if that's okay, because you mentioned some really interesting things in your overview, sort of, you know, the value of really come to light during this period. And I didn't know if there's anything else you could share there about how the profession has stepped up.
So I think on reflecting on that question, for me, this has been a really interesting place for property and FM, because we space, a lot of us are trying to navigate virtual facilities management, because and perhaps ask some of the bigger questions, if you have more of an office portfolio, about what is the reason we have a physical estate and what will be the reason for it going forward. So I feel there's been a lot of small scale innovation in our business as usual, having to adapt to the now, in terms of undertaking virtual inspection, using team members who are perhaps less technical to support others who are needed for other things, and moving space around. The way we've worked has changed, not just in sort of gathering compliments and raising our profile, but for example, having to close whole fire stations is very rarely done, and that gives us a sudden vacant building, so we have to think about the patrol and response security and so on and so forth. So there's lots of small scale things, but for me, I feel like the innovation is really going to come down the line. We are already asking our workforce and our senior leaders, why do you come to the workplace? Previously, LFE was quite traditional. There was a very strong rhetoric around being in the office. We print a lot of paper. Our senior management team have a suite with offices and a sort of secretarial space outside. You know, it's a very much a uniformed service, and that's all had to change, and it's worked relatively well. So I suspect that the innovation will really be in the weeks to come, and we're looking already at what that means for our HQ and our office estate. We've also seen property and estates and FM step into new areas. So we quite quickly in property started to look at surveying how people were finding working from home, what tools and techniques were going well, and we've really sort of supported HR in our ownership of workplace. HR was incredibly stretched at the time, looking at getting everybody mobile and out of the door and all the rest of it, and there was a great opportunity there for FM to own workplace, which obviously overlaps with IT and HR significantly. And again, I think that those kinds of opportunities are really going to come in the future. So for us, we see innovation coming down the line as we look at what the future holds.
Thanks very much, Laura. Yeah, I was talking to somebody else about this very thing this morning, that, you know, we are in the thick of it at the moment, and a lot of things are about the short-term lockdown period, and really the next phase, isn't it, is going to be about medium and long-term solutions. So thank you very much for that. I'll throw one more in here about sort of what's been happening to date. You could argue that in times of a national crisis like this, that we see the best and the worst of actions and behaviours. And I just wanted to ask if you had any experiences about maybe the bests and the worst so far. I mean, I can lend an example from my point of view that certainly in the first week, I struggled quite a lot in terms of being able to balance this, what I mentioned in my overview, this sort of continuous core delivery to our students that we had to deliver, with dealing with homeschooling a 7 and 10-year-old and looking after a toddler at the same time, whilst having a wife who's currently self-employed. So that's been a real challenge, and it was really sort of panic and anxiety. And one of the worst behaviours I've sort of seen is, you know, the raft of productivity guidance that we were given in those first couple of weeks on, you know, learning a new language and why don't you do this and why don't you do that? And all I was thinking is, how am I going to get through to tomorrow? I'd flip that in contrast with some of the best actions and behaviours I've seen, which has come from the top down in my organisation. And I think it's been really great in terms of, you know, we're not alone. We're really, you know, every situation is unique, and from the top down, the organisation is here for us. And for me, that's been a really important thing, to have that support. I don't know if there's anything else anyone wants to share before we move on to the next tranche of questions in terms of best and worst behaviours or actions.
Hi, Matt, it's Andy. I've got one actually. I think in terms of best, I think the dedication and commitment of some of the FM teams in roles which may have been previously undervalued. So frontline cleaners, for example, has really been evident, where you know a lot of home, yeah, they're getting into work every day. They're undertaking their work in the heightened risk because of the virus risk with present in these environments that they're cleaning. And also, so for worst, I think some of the opportunist profiteering for products such as PPE, hand sanitizer, etc. All of a sudden, there's proliferation of suppliers who you may never have heard of before, who all of a sudden have laid their hands on a supply of face masks or hand sanitizer or cleaning materials, which is suddenly for sale at several times its previous cost.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Andy. And yeah, I agree with those points. I just want to turn our minds now to thinking about, you know, moving towards post-lockdown phase, whenever that will be, and switching the economy back on, getting people moving again. You know, it's likely there's going to be a lot of restrictions that will remain for some time to come. But where do you see the biggest opportunities for workplace and facilities managers to really make a mark in this? And perhaps I can come back to you, Kenneth.
I suppose the main issue at the moment is we really don't know what the future is going to have in store for us. But I think in relation to FM, we're extremely good at adapting and responding to challenge. I mean, we're going to have to go back into our workplaces, not really sure what that's going to look like. Going to have to come up with innovative solutions if we're going to implement social distancing. I mean, from everything from toilet provision to fire safety, how do we cover that within social distancing? You know, and I think it's the ability to adapt to the changing advice that's coming out from central government, because we obviously want to get back to normal as quickly as we possibly can and do that safely, but we need to do that by balancing the risk to individuals. And we've also got a situation where significant numbers of people are working from home, and they're probably now getting into quite a routine of working from home, and it works well. So we've got to balance that while continue with people who wish to work from home and providing a safe environment for others that either can't work from home or would prefer to work in the office.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Kenneth. Okay, I'm gonna change our attention now to maybe thinking about some of the lasting implications that we might have. when we are hopefully on the other side of this this pandemic, perhaps in 6 months or a year from now, I'd like to ask each of you from a personal, professional, or even an organizational perspective, what will stay with you point or a change in approach or practice that you think will endure beyond this specific period? Maybe what will stay with you the most as a learning point or a change in approach?
Sure. So I think there will be a lot of things that will stay that perhaps aren't new but have needed such a sharp shock for everyone to adjust and realize and bite the bullet. And I think there's a second group of things that are also genuinely new, and those are things I think that are probably harder to see right now. So I think a lot of the things that will stay for me are things that we were trying to do in the first place, but couldn't quite get the buy-in, couldn't quite get the cultural change. And this has been quite a positive, albeit in a very challenging and unfortunate circumstances, way of giving those momentum. So in terms, as I said, of considering office redesign, there may be other organisations out there like mine that were really trying to encourage that debate and move away from some of the traditional ways of working. I think the COVID experience probably means we won't go back to that. And the arguments behind staying in more traditional layouts and not sharing and not collaborating won't be as well understood. I think that the impact on IT and other services that we need to make that flexible way of working in our office estates will also have to keep adapting. I think that point about the profile of property and the profile of essential but often not highly regarded services will now remain high for quite a long time, but I think that will fade, and we need to keep thinking about that and keep promoting that and ensuring that we have budget for that. When we redesign our office, we will definitely take some of the principles of social distancing forward so that we are trying to future-proof for similar situations and think perhaps, and I think we'll have more credibility when people offset density versus rental cost. We'll have a much stronger platform to leverage that well-being discussion and that office design discussion against just rent, to be honest. So I think in those spaces, we've all known that for some time, but this has given us the impetus. Similarly, when we look at our estate from a sustainability lens, the working from home, the reduced travel, the where do we recycle the print costs and all that kind of thing, that discussion that perhaps wasn't given the impetus before, wasn't perhaps glamorous enough in terms of waste management and water management, etc. I think all those things are now having a completely different meaning to my stakeholders and my C-suite. So they're not new, but they're getting a lot of impetus. When I look into the future, some of the things I really want to continue that have been new is that culture of thanks. I often feel like FM can be a bit of a complaints department. And right now, I think there's a really high degree of gratitude and understanding that this is not quite as easy as people believe it to be. We've seen a real reduction of people on their I fix it at home and I clean at home type rhetoric to really see this as a profession and all the facets of it as being professional. That's something that I feel is relatively new and is to be encouraged. I'm certainly going to try my best to see more of that come through. I think we'll also potentially see a lot more government guidance and industry that hasn't been there before in some of these spaces. And again, that speaks to an increased professionalization of our industry. And that's something that I think employers like myself need to be really full of, help colleagues and staff upskill to maintain. Because I think when this calms down, IWFM, amongst other bodies, would be right to look at how we can leverage the impact we've had to seek more and more professional advancement for members of this profession.
Thank you, Laura. You said something in there which really struck me about, you talked about the value that Workplace and FM has had during this time and that it's really been at the forefront of people's minds, but perhaps that will eventually fade over time, which struck a chord with me really. And you're right, it's traditionally our services are often thought of in an operational capacity, not so much directly influencing the core business. We know. Everybody agree with that perhaps this will fade, and if so, what are the sort of risks there, and how will we deal with that? Has anybody got any responses to that?
Matt, I don't think they will fade. I think that the present situation that we've got at the moment is going to continue for quite a while. So FM is going to have to support, or asset management is going to support the new ways of working, the new ways we're going to work within the buildings. Buildings are going to have to change, as we talked about earlier, and potentially with a shift of more people potentially working from home, we need to look at the environments and what we do with those. And what the lasting implications are going to be for the transport network, for instance. There's going to be pressure on whether people can continue to wish to travel to work. I think there's going to be a lot of change for a long time, and I think we've got a real key part to play in adapting workplaces and organisations to meet the changing need.
Yeah,
thanks very much, Kenneth. Yeah, go on, Andy.
Yeah, I think if I can echo that. I think sort of FM now has the opportunity for business operations, whereas previously it was seen as something of a back office function. But now a huge number of different organisations need support in defining and facilitating new ways of working and new workplace designs, and also enabling socially distanced working, remote working, and occasional attendance, and managing workplaces to support that.
Thanks very much, Andy. And one last point on this before we move on to hearing from the listeners today. Who do you think then are going to be the drivers and the enablers to ensure that this doesn't fade? The value that we've shown so far, it doesn't fade away. Any thoughts on that?
I would think that IWFM's got a big part to play within this going forward.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, the guidance that has been coming out, the responsiveness of guidance coming from professional bodies has been excellent. As with, I've seen guidance and useful information from all sorts of strands, not just within professional institutes, which has been really valuable. And I hope that continues in terms of being able to react quickly to a situation and provide readily available information. It would be great if that can continue into the future.
Yeah, I think to add to that is that a lot of organisations are willing to freely share that information, where previously it's been sort of held at the company's level as their own information. So I think we're certainly seeing a situation just now where people extremely readily want to share information to help others, so because realising that we're all on this together. So hopefully that arrangement's going to continue within the future as well.
Great, good stuff. Go on, Laura.
I was going to say, well, just for our perspective, I'm trying to create lots of platforms to celebrate success, which again, we were doing anyway, but this gives us impetus because I completely agree with Connie, as I said, but what I think may fade is the appreciation of FM in this space, because people get used to a high standard of performance. And I've noticed since being in the FM world, quite different from my surveying background, staff, whether they're supply or in-house, don't really seek the limelight. They've sort of become used, I think, to being in the background and being essential but unobserved and not thanked terribly often. I think the IWFM can really help embed some of the new profile, that's true, but I think we really need a big shout out to leaders amongst the profession to continue to promote how important the profession is, if that makes sense, and encourage staff of all grades to ask for compliments and to expect thanks. I spend a lot of my time promoting FM in our in-house publications, in newsletters, on events like this, and encourage FMers to listen in. And I feel like that's something that everyone has to be part of, really, that wider comms piece, because that's what I think will fade. Not so much the impact, but the respect and recognition of our sector within it. And I think that's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, that's great, and I would agree with that and go one further, that it's also, you often see FM scenarios presented as problems, whereas this whole experience has given us the opportunity to present problems as opportunities, and how we can actually really benefit from a lot of the things going on. So I'm gonna close down the panel discussion and try and move on to hearing from some of our today, and we've had some different questions coming in, and I do apologize if we can't get to all of them within this segment, but we'll endeavour to respond to them all over the course of the next few days outside of this webinar. I'm going to kick off with one which is actually for you, Laura, which is from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Would you mind elaborating on how your team has undertaken the virtual inspections that you mentioned?
Sure. So this is one of my late night ideas. You can imagine working with me that I have a lot of these ideas, and the team are fully encouraged to tell me to push off. But this one seems to be doing all right, actually. So we adapted an FM audit that I actually haven't rolled out in this role. It's something I used previously, but we're very keen to implement here. And again, although it wasn't ready, we did a quick piece of adaptation on it. And effectively, it's basically a guided conversation, so a couple of lines of script and a checklist. So a non-expert person will ring a fire station, trying to focus on the person in control of premises, because they're supposed to know. And we ask them in advance to have the premises logbook with them. And then they are taken through some very high-level questions. A lot of them relating to general cleanliness or general maintenance in specific parts of the station. So that could be your drill tower or your appliance bay or your watch room, etc. So very, very high level. They're asked to look in the logbook to see if it's really up to date, particularly on any flushing for Legionella, because the way the brigade does that is quite specific, not for now. And the audit concludes with asking the person to unlock the plant room and just to look for any really obvious leaks, rubbish, or alarms that are going off, or something like that. It's very much couched in the form of there is no, I don't say obligation. What do I mean? You know, if you make a mistake, either the person filling out the form or giving the information, there's no comeback, as it were. This is done collaboratively and to keep maintenance going. And on all of the forms, there's a caveat that this is not an opportunity to shoehorn in a gold taps exercise. You know, this is not about requesting your ideal project. This is about ensuring the current standard of maintenance is ongoing. We decided not to include in the audit questions along the lines of, did your PPM get done, or have you seen anyone on site recently? That is posing a problem for us in terms of invoicing, etc., and confirming work's being done, but we thought that wasn't appropriate, so we've had other workarounds on that. It's a very high level form filling exercise. And then what that does is it might create requirement for works. The person will either confirm if they've already rung our help desk to instruct works, or if they haven't, then my member of staff will do it for them. At the end of the audit, we basically pass or fail the audit. It's done on a very subjective basis. We again decided that algorithms, etc., weren't helpful. This is really a quick fix for the current period. If overall on balance the station is deemed to have failed the audit, as it were, it doesn't mean it's not compliant or anything like that. It just means that there are some other issues to come back to, and we put it on our list to follow up. If on balance we think the station has passed, i.e. works that are needed are being logged, even if they're not going to be done anytime soon, you know, etc., then that one we probably won't come back to outside of the scheduled next call. I hope that gives a flavour of it. It's very light touch because you can get into some really challenging areas on this. So it's very high level and light touch with lots of caveats around it. But so far it's gone really well. Stations really appreciate the effort as much as anything else. And I'm hoping it smooths out our backlog of maintenance because at least we can create a log of jobs rather than having everything flood in at once.
No, that's great, and I hope that answers your question, Sarah. And you know, it's another good example, isn't it, of where we've seen innovation or novelty there to really, you know, react to the situation. So thanks for that information, Laura. There's been a couple of questions that have come in which are quite similar, so I'm going to try and combine them from thank you, James, and thank you, Paul. I'll go with something James has said first about if the panel could perhaps give some advice or guidance in terms of how organizations are managing working from home arrangements, and you know, whether we can consider these arrangements temporary or more longer term. I think it's an interesting point, you know, about how we're dealing with the medium and long term moving forward, and whether this support is to get us through this temporary lockdown phase, if there is support at all, and how that maybe move on into the future. That links to a question from Paul, which was more about, do we need to step up training and learning on virtual environments and collaborative working? Does any of the panel have any views on that?
I'm quite happy to make a start on that question, if that's okay. I think we were quite fortunate that the Mott MacDonald had invested significant sums in upgrading our IT systems and moving across to Office 365 platform and Teams. So while this event occurred, we basically managed to mobilise 7,000 staff in Europe to home working virtually overnight with very little hiccups. So we've now got virtually everyone working from home now, and we've put a lot of arrangements in place to support that. With I've got a daily team call with my team that we have every 9 o'clock every morning, just to make sure everybody's okay. So it might not even be a case that we need to talk about work things, but it's just making sure that everybody's okay and they feel happy, and people could dial in or when and if they see fit. Conduct all of our meetings via majority Teams now, which we found to work extremely well. And I think as an organisation, we're in quite a good place. I think that what we're finding now is other organisations are potentially taking a bit of time to get up to speed on this. But one of the good things that we're finding, where we've worked with a number of clients who've really sort of demanded that you be on site and meet face to face, that now working through the virtual environment, that they're finding that they're quite comfortable with that. I think particularly where it involves long distance travel and advisory, if you're spending a long time traveling, it's not really productive time. So now we're able to meet with clients a lot more often in virtual meetings, and we're finding that really beneficial. Okay.
Anything anyone else would like to add to that? Okay, I mean, just as okay, go on, Andy.
No, sounds good. Sounds good. I think this crisis has prompted organisations to look at which roles can be undertaken remotely, can be undertaken elsewhere, but also which people actually do need to be on site. Obviously, there's a number of roles, particularly when you get to technical hands-on roles, which can't be performed remotely. In some cases, we can provide technological solutions to support those roles and to enable them to be done better. So virtual reality and augmented reality solutions are increasingly being deployed across the FM sector. But there are some roles which need somebody to be on the ground in the workplace to undertake them. And so as organisations in the FM sector, we need to ensure that we make sure that those roles can be undertaken safely, and that we are properly managing the welfare of those members of our teams that are delivering them.
Great, thanks very much, Andy. We have a question that's come in from Yakeem, thank you very much, about what the expected or forecasted new service requirements are for workplaces and residencies. And it's actually something I've been looking at in the last couple of days a little bit more, and certainly from a resident's point of view. And perhaps I could just ask you a little bit more about that. I mean, what I'd be interested in asking is, whether employers have any appetite to support working from home, not just through flexibility, encouraging technological support, but what about in terms of providing support for infrastructure, funding for infrastructure within residencies? Is this something which you see being possible, having the right furniture, the right tech, and actually seeing that as a realistic investment outside of an office workplace? Any views on that one?
I think for me, what I'm advising, albeit I'm a little bit removed from this conversation in some respects, but for me, I'm advising my stakeholders not to think in such binary terms as being at home or being at work. I think what we're looking at, and I'm sure younger colleagues will attest to this, is we are a very much more mobile workforce than we've ever been before. And really, I'm encouraging the fire brigade to look at any kind of solution that's mobile. So really, your workplace is anywhere you are. And that works particularly nicely, actually, for FM in particular, because if you've got the right kit, then you can be on site in the plant room just as much as in the office with the board paper, because you are mobile. And we've really struggled in the past of sort of writing notes and writing up notes and all that sort of thing. And I agree with my colleagues that while FM will also become more and more online with sensors and all those other bits of technology we're all looking at, ultimately it's a customer business. And although I'm a client side, I still have a customer like anyone else. It's going to be very difficult, I think, in the long term for me to really get under the skin of my building and my customer and how it's operating without some degree of site visit, construction project and FM maintenance elements. So I feel quite confident that the physical will remain in my space, but for my office colleagues or my more office-based colleagues, I would be looking at investing in the person and their ability to work anywhere rather than setting them up discrete spaces either at home or not at home. And that's cultural just as much as what kit you give. That kind of personal resilience and isolation piece at home is really coming to the fore, which is helpful, and just as kind of too much noise and distraction and generic spacing in the office hasn't been helpful previously. So I think we're looking at the personalisation of the office, and there's a lot written on that trend that where we had cellular offices, then we had open plan offices, then we had hot desking. Now I think we're in that era of personalisation, and I think this will only exacerbate that further.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Laura. I think it's having the flexibility, to whether you need to be in the office or work from home or to do both, because depending on what activities you're undertaking that day, it may be beneficial to work from home, as opposed to, you may have to meet with many different colleagues as well. I don't think there's a one size fits all, but I think having the ability to invest in the person for them to be flexible to work at a place that actually suits them and to suit the organisation.
Yeah, some really good points, thank you. And I suppose the term working from home assumes you want to be at home. It may be somewhere else that is not home, but it's also not the office or the workplace. So lots of food for thought there. Well, unfortunately, that brings us to a close. And I do apologise if we've not managed to get through all of the questions. We will endeavour to try and answer those outside of the webinar if need be. I'm just going to close with a few final remarks, if that's okay. Firstly, I would like to give a huge thank you to our guests, Laura, Kenneth and Andy, for giving up your time to speak to us today. And most importantly, I'd like to thank all the listeners that have tuned in during this lunchtime to hear what the panel has to say. I'd just like to find information for you to think about for the future. I'd like to encourage all of our members to share your case studies and best practice, and you can do that via email into the address that you see on the screen. So I'd really like to encourage you to do that. In addition to that, there is lots of amazing information available through the IWFM Insight Hub, research reports, good practice guides, etc. So follow the URL that you see on your screen now, and be sure to check that out. In addition to that, there is being updated on a daily basis specific to COVID-19, and you can access that directly from the IWFM front web page. So we're really at a close here now, guys. My name is Matthew Tucker, and it's been an absolute privilege being your host today. Please look out for updates on our next webinar in the Navigating Turbulent Times series, and do stay safe and stay at home, everybody. We look forward to hearing from you and speaking to you soon. Bye-bye.